regimental hospital of the Third Army where he was to serve. He was 22 years old, restless, resentful of hierarchy, impatient for his training to come to an end. For 3 years he had studied alone in the libraries, devoted to medicine with a monastic severity. Onion paper feathered the margins of his textbooks, licked and pasted in by hand. In the great halls, on gleaming lantern slides, he'd seen the ravages of typhus, scarlatina, lupus, pest. He had memorized the signs of cocainism and hysteria, knew that the breath of cyanide poisoning smelt of almonds, and the murmur of a narrowed aortic valve could be heard in the neck. In tie and jacket, freshly ironed for the day, he'd spent hours staring down from the dizzying heights of the surgery theatre, straining his neck for a line of sight through the restless coveys of his classmates, over the neatly combed heads of senior students, over the junior professors, the surgeon's assistants, across the surgical drape and down into the cut. By the time war was declared, he was dreaming nightly of the theatre. Long, demanding dreams in which he extracted impossible organs, half man, half pig. It was on butcher's scraps he practiced. One night, dreaming of an extraction of the gallbladder, he had such a distinct impression of the wet, leaden warmth of the liver that he woke certain he could carry out the surgery alone. If his devotion was total, its origin remained a mystery. As a child, he had gazed with wonder at the wax cadavers at the Anatomical Museum, but so had his 3 brothers, and not one of them had turned to Hippocrates' art. There were no doctors in his line, not among the Krzelewskis of southern Poland, and certainly not among his mother's people. At times, cornered by some peahen at one of her unbearable receptions, he endured a condescending speech on how medicine was a noble calling, that one day he would be rewarded for his kindness. But kindness was not interesting to him. His best answer to what drove his endless hours of study was the joy of study itself. He was not a person drawn to religious devotion, but it was in religion that he found the words, revelation, epiphany, the miracle of God's creations, and, by extension, the miracle of how God's creations failed. Study itself. This was, at least, the answer that he gave in his moments of greatest exaltation. But there was another reason he had turned to medicine, one he only considered later in the hours of his doubt. Of the 2 other students he could call his friends, Feuermann was the son of a tailor, while Kaminski, who wore empty spectacles just to look older, was on a scholarship from the Sisters of Mercy. Although they never spoke of it, Lucius knew they had all come to medicine for its promise of social mobility. For Feuermann and Kaminski, this meant up, from the slums of Leopoldstadt and the charity school. For Lucius, whose father came from an ancient Polish family that claimed descent from Japheth, son of Noah, yes, that Noah, and in whose mother's veins coursed the same cerulean blood as that great liberator of Vienna and savior of Western civilization, Jan Sobieski, King of Poland, Grand Duke of Lithuania, Ruthenia, Prussia, Masovia, Samogitia, Livonia, Smolensk, Kiev, Volhynia, etc., etc. For Lucius, such mobility meant not up, but out. No, from the beginning he hadn't belonged among them. An accidental 6th child born years after the doctor told his mother she couldn't conceive again. Were he not the spitting image of his father, tall and big-pawed, with skin pale as alabaster, a shock of blonde hair fit for an Icelander, and old man's ducktail eyebrows even as a little boy, he might have wondered if he was another's child. But the flushes of ruddiness that gave his father the hale glow of a knight who has just removed his jouster's helmet, in Lucius looked more like blotches of an embarrassed blush. Watching his brothers and sisters glide through his mother's receptions, he could never understand their ease, their grace, their force.